So the curved screen reflects across itself cross balance. And it's an issue to understand and know that if there's a hot white area, particularly white cloud sky, if that's going to be up in the top half and it's just going to be bouncing white light across the screen, and your aesthetics of the control you want to have, it washes the whole screen out. We have a sample upstairs we'll look at that Paul found yesterday. So I find that the audience is moving. Now, I'll be happy to be challenged about this, but if you feel like the theater's tilting, that means that all the experience is on the audience's side, not on the up of the screen. So I find the audience is also growing and shrinking. If you actually come in close to something like a small insect or those ants we saw last night, we all shrunk to ant size. We became ants in that piece. It wasn't like they were huge. We were all down to 5 millimeters. That was wild, wasn't it? And we were kind of encased in their size stuff. And I find that's a really useful tool to have. And the puzzle becomes how to pace it for cognitive sensation and how to put people in these shots. But I find it's really interesting to be able to sit outside. I can actually watch films. You'll watch some films, you'll say, what was going on there that was odd, which is that they were watching it, you can see how nice it would have been on the editing table, because it was all static inside the frame. But inside the big theater, all of a sudden it gets all this movement. I think that tracking the scale of things, objects within the image is really important, because I personally think the audience grows and shrinks. The question will be, in putting live action people on the screen, whether that's tracked that way as well, as people move close to us. Everybody understand what's going on here? I set it up as a puzzle. I put some people on the screen, and perhaps tonight we can look at them. You'll see tonight how people are put as tall, full, standing people most all of the time. So I find it a first-person experience. It's the way I like to describe it. So movement in the shots needs to have continuity. One often hears, I've heard in IMAX and Omnimax that movies have good parts. That tells me that it didn't work in the whole. The continuity was all interrupted. I thought it was working fine, but the audience was having a bad experience. And so I want to make sure the images are strung together. There's lots of depth of field in computer-related images. Depth of field is just, there's a focal plane, right, everybody understands this, and then live action, and then it slowly gets gradually more and more out of focus in front and behind it. And all computer-generated stuff has infinite depth of field. The reason Avatar looks so good is almost all the sequences were all computer-generated, and there was focus way in the background and focus in the foreground. And if you watch any of the Pixar movies, everything's in focus wherever you can see. And as soon as you put a photographic image up there, you have to deal with the depth of field that the lens is doing, and depth of field is inversely proportional to the size of the screen it's on. So the more you make an image bigger, the shallower the focus is in the front and behind the focus plane. That's just, it's very standard. It's in the American Cinematographer's Manual. It's inversely proportional to the size of the screen. So you have a small image here, it looks all good, and focus in the foreground. The bigger it gets, the focus from the back and the front is going to shrink, the more it's shown bigger. Because that's all apparent focus. And I've had camera people that you can't see it in the field, you can't see it on the editing table, you only see it in the big screen. And I've thrown out 5 or 6 shots because we got back to in the theater, we watched it, and it was just out of focus. You can't use it as much as I wanted to. And that macro shot I showed you of that insect last night, the focus on that head was only that much. And we spent about 2 hours shooting that shot, and I watched the DP look at the cinematographer's manual and measure from the lens. And I gave him as much time as he wanted because I knew what he was dealing with. He was trying to figure out the focus, and he was pulling the focus forward so it would look like that, so that it would carry all the way through the steps until it was projected. There's something over there on the screen, and all of a sudden a new image comes in over there. You can see that I actually have to turn my head to see it. And what happens instead of what we usually do in editing is have new images come in and take over the old image. And what happens, I find, in this dome, especially when your head is slightly moved off, is that the image leaves, and it leaves you staring at nothing. You don't know where the new image is coming in. You have to lead the audience to where the new image is coming in. That's what my axis is for, and that's why I was showing you the framing. And what usually happens is it's a background that's kind of out of focus. And so all of a sudden the image will vanish just like that, and you're looking at just mush. And then you have to actually look around again, and what the intention was to actually come in with the image. And so I suggest in editing, you have to think a lot about the fact that what it looks like it's only, this far apart, this screen, it's probably that far apart on the bigger screens that are on the dome screen as it gets bigger and bigger. Music is often written to movies. I have found it much more useful, obviously it's 100% experience, but I find it much more useful to edit to music that's real music rather than having music composed. because it can be very amusical, because it's like a real experience you're in, and all of a sudden you're much more attuned to the music than watching a movie inside of the frame. So I'm saying here, you'll see what the audience is seeing, and let it be a visceral experience, so give them time to feel stuff. But there was one sequence I wanted to cut real short, excuse me, in Seasons, and I showed it at one point. It was an aerial flying down a river, and went way up on its side, and then it came back down. And we were going to cut it right after the ending, and some audience friends came in to watch it, and they all were screaming when they went around that corner. And I realized I had to let them settle back down, and then we picked up the music. We put a much longer gap in the music, and in fact, the audience's voices become part of the soundtrack. Because it happens on every show. The audience screaming and talking to each other, they all get excited. Because it's one of those pitched up rides in a helicopter. It sits there for a while, and all of a sudden it swoops back down again. And one feels like, okay, I'm out, I'm down to that shot. No, you gotta let the audience feel it and settle down, because they're having a whole different experience. So the other thing that I wanted to particularly note is that the screen is a huge, vast piece of negative space, any dome. Remember last night at Hugh's piece with that lovely dancer who danced all around the grid work and then slowly came down and stood on the frame line, and the rest of the entire screen was black? It's all negative space. And the whole thing collapsed down to this one intimate piece with per person. Greg McGilvray, who's done a number of IMAX films, wrote an article before I made my first film talking about how he put a 35mm kind of film here, and then he expanded the screen at the beginning, and it was always a big wow. And when I did the Seasons film, I found 12 times that I could through that. I came down to a graphic, and I expanded the screen again, and I came down to some close-up, and it had it all surrounded in black. And I expanded the screen again, and it has this huge, wonderful wraparound impact. It goes back and forth. And so it's about the fact that the space exists there, but you don't have to fill it all the time. You just use it as a place that we're in, and you can take some of the display away. And then when you come up with all the details, it's really exciting to see it the next time. So the summary is we are immersed within the experience. The immersive experience is viewed without a frame. It's frameless. So Seagraph very nicely provided me with this template, which was a frame, which drove me crazy. And, look, I mean, so right there was a frame. It's a whole framed. The whole show I was talking about framelessness was framed. I had to throw my own frame away and get the thing done at the end. And this was their symbol at the